Hey, hello. Welcome back to Matt and Cheryl's Gen Excellent playlist. I'm Matt.
I'm Cheryl.
We've been promising for many episodes now that we're eventually going to bring some rock into your world and our playlist. And this is the episode where we get to do it. We're in the early stages of 1980. If you've been following along with our little project, we're building a Generation X playlist, a sample of the soundtrack of our lives, starting from our earliest music memories in 1972. We've worked our way into 1980. So now we're getting to a point where our peers are more into music and buying records and following the charts and such. The songs we've added to the playlist so far have been pretty poppy for the most part. A lot of dance-oriented stuff, disco, R&B, soul, some rock songs. Not a lot so far, but the rock songs we've had in there have been pretty mainstream. 1980 really, Cheryl, I'm sure you'd agree here, very pivotal year for hard rock music. And, well, heavy metal is a term that had been bandied around for a decade or more. And this is the year when it really kind of started to consolidate into its own separate identity. It was a very big year for metal's emergence as a genre unto itself. And there were some big mainstream successes within that genre in the year 1980.
Yeah, this is the year where heavy metal crosses over into popular radio, and there's a lot of debate over what would be considered heavy metal and if it even was considered like an actual genre before this. And I think that that's something I'm not qualified to debate, but I think that there's a lot that can be said for, what comprises heavy metal, like what is heavy metal? And in 1980, this is where we see the new wave of British heavy metal. Now, I'm not saying that the songs that we are discussing today fall into that category, but we're right on the cusp of that happening. So, now we're talking about heavy metal as a popular genre, and there's a lot of bands that are getting lumped into that category because it has a name now that people can start to actually define.
The new wave of British heavy metal, one of the most awkward acronyms ever. NWOBHM.
I know. The first time I saw it written out as an acronym, I was like, what is that? But really, I feel like 1980 is just very much the cusp of that. 81, 82 is where we kind of start to get into much more of that. But I do think that it is the start of this genre coming up and really becoming part of the popular mainstream.
So now in the year 1980, I was fifth grade into sixth. And, really in sixth grade is when I first started noticing that kids were listening to this harder rock music. Now, it wasn't part of my world at that point in time. It wouldn't be for a while.
No, me either.
Yeah, that's really when I first started noticing, classmates, peers, going off down that road and listening to this dangerous hard rock music that hooligans and delinquents listen to.
Yeah. I was mainly introduced to it only through like older brothers, like friends who had older brothers that listened to this music.
I didn't have that luxury being the older sibling in my family. So I was still very pop in 1980, listening to the top 40 and keeping close track of the charts and starting to buy 45 records and, starting to make tapes of things. And this music really wasn't a part of it. And you think about why this is such a critical year. Now, the roots of the music go back more than a decade, and you can really go back even to some 50s blues artists, develop some of the hallmarks of what this music would become in terms of loud, distorted guitars and that kind of thing. Really starts to coalesce around what they called acid rock music in the mid-60s, the emergence of the psychedelic era, particularly the West Coast American bands. Jefferson Airplane would be a good example, and Moby Grape and bands like that. Although really the key band, the progenitor, the source, I think you'd have to look first at the Yardbirds, particularly after Jeff Beck replaces Eric Clapton. They're a straight blues band, although a rocked up blues band with Eric Clapton. He leaves because they're kind of veering away from that. He's a traditionalist and he just wanted to play the blues. He didn't like the directions they were taking, get a little more experimental and flirting with pop. So in comes Jeff Beck, and Jeff Beck is just this innovative, obviously gifted technician, but very innovative and experimental, and starts to bring in these different guitar effects. And now you start to hear more of the harder rock sound out of electric guitar from him and people like, Jimi Hendrix and Pete Townsend. The guitars are getting louder, the drums are getting louder, the music's getting heavier.
Well, and you can certainly put Keith Moon and John Entwistle into that category, and that's really what brought The Who up to that level.
Right. And then I guess there's the holy trinity of hard rock and then often called heavy metal bands, but I don't know that term applies. I wouldn't apply it to one or two of these bands, but the three bands, Led Zeppelin, which came out of the remnants of the Yardbirds, Deep Purple, and they didn't start out as strictly a heavy band. They kind of transformed into that at the turn of the decade, turn of the 70s. And then most importantly, and the most metal of the three, I think all would agree, Black Sabbath. If you're looking at the first band,
if the name, if anything.
Right. I think, it's so hard to define heavy metal. It's been applied to a lot of bands that don't accept that as a description of their music. Led Zeppelin certainly never did. And their music's way too varied, I think, for that term. Very diverse. And Black Sabbath, honestly, didn't. I think those guys kind of resisted the term for many years, too. They liked the term downer rock, which was a perfect term for it. If you see vintage clips of Black Sabbath concerts from the early 70s, you're talking about a massive crowd of just completely zonked out dudes drunken on Quaaludes.
And pretty much all dudes.
Yeah, that's right. The Quaalude was the emerging dominant downer drug at the time. But there's the old line, I think, that came out of, I don't know, the Supreme Court or court discussions about pornography. It's like, how do you define pornography? Well, you know it when you see it. It's kind of the same with heavy metal, I think. You know it when you hear it. When the visual part is important, too. There's a visual element and a sound signature. But I think Deep Purple definitely had a strong element of it. And a lot of their early 70s stuff is very metal sounding. Tracks like Highway Star, the In Rock album. But Black Sabbath, really, if you're looking to pin down the first metal band, not everything they did sounded like metal. But I think they're really the first one for me.
And I think the key part of what puts them in that category, too, is the heavy part.
Yeah.
Geezer Butler, that heavy bass, it has a heaviness to it that other music of that time didn't necessarily have. And yeah, I was actually surprised because I really hadn't listened to Black Sabbath that much, but they had some pretty pop sounding stuff too. And it was not all really that heavy. And I mean, the same is to be said for Ozzy too, I think, as his solo career. And, you could say the Beatles had a heavy metal song, Helter Skelter.
That's a valid claim. A lot of people scoff at that, but that is a valid claim.
And I think pretty much every band that has had a long enough career has dabbled into all different genres of music. Black Sabbath is one of those bands, too, that you really just can't say they are just strictly heavy metal, but they definitely do tend more toward that than anything else. And because they're an early example, people can kind of put a place marker on them. And they had the look, too. They had the fan base. They had the whole package in that sense of what kind of became what you would expect from heavy metal. Although it did change, it certainly morphed and changed over time. And we are on the cusp of that right now in 1980, of it changing over, too, into something that eventually kind of becomes more like glam rock even, or, hair metal bands and all the stuff that really came out of the 80s. The two bands that we're going to talk about today had been around for a long time.
That's right. So Black Sabbath gives us Ozzy Osbourne, their lead vocalist. He was kicked out of the band in 1979 and really struggling in his personal life at this time with alcoholism and cocaine addiction. He puts out his first solo record in 1980, although we'll talk about it. It wasn't necessarily conceived as a solo album. It's the way it came out. But Blizzard of Oz, the LP, his name is big on the title, much to the surprise of some of his bandmates when the album cover came out. But of course, the key track on there and a hard rock classic beloved to this day is Crazy Train. That's going to be one of the songs that we add to our playlist today. Now, the other song is definitely not metal, and you can make a claim that Crazy Train isn't metal either. We're going to talk about whether Blizzard of Oz, the album, is really very metal. I mean, I don't know. Doesn't seem that way to me. AC/DC comes out with the Back in Black album in 1980, a massive record in many respects. And the hit single off of that album, You Shook Me All Night Long, is definitely one of the key tracks from 1980, and we're going to add that to our playlist and talk about that today. But let's differentiate hard rock from metal here. So Black Sabbath, they used to call themselves Earth, and they were a hard blues band. They were a heavy blues band. But I think one of the key things that separates metal from hard rock is the lack of blues influence. Heavy metal is definitely more white than hard rock. Hard rock can still have a strong blues R&B influence, a black influence. So like a band like Aerosmith has been tagged with it. Aerosmith is not heavy metal. They're a funky band with a strong blues and R&B backing. although some of their heavy songs certainly fit, individual songs could fit under that description. But the band itself, no, not heavy metal. AC/DC the same. They're a groove band. AC/DC is all about that rhythmic groove. Angus Young was the poster boy, and he's a great lead guitarist, but the heart and soul of that group really is his brother, Malcolm Young, the engine of that band, and that driving 4/4 rhythm behind him.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes them so great. They're still locked into that groove that comes from R&B, soul. So they've never wanted that term applied to their music. They said, we are just a rock and roll band. That's it. We're a rock and roll band. And there's definitely roll in their music. It's groovy.
That was one of the things that came to mind for me too, is you remove the blues influence.
Yeah.
And that's where you get the heavy metal genre.
Yeah, you have the heavy guitars, you have the pounding drums, but metal, you're going to have more European classical influence in the instrumentation, in the absence of the blues influence that fed a lot of rock and roll and hard rock music. Musically, I think that's the key distinction here. It's drawing more on, I said classical, many would say Baroque period. So like really intricate arrangements and lead guitar work. Instrumental virtuosity is a hallmark of metal music. You could play hard rock without being particularly technically virtuous on your instrument. Nobody's going to confuse AC/DC as a bunch of virtuosos. Although, again, Angus Young, certainly a great soloist on electric guitar, but their music is extremely basic. I mean, it is stripped down. It's basic. It's all about that driving beat and that groove and that rhythm guitar, and it's just riff-tastic.
Yeah.
Malcolm Young, one of the great riff-meisters of all time. So that's the key distinction. And a lot of metal music, not all of it, but a lot of it, it's going to be two guitars. It's going to be rhythm and lead or dual lead. Very few of these bands are going to be single guitars, which kind of makes Ozzy's album distinct because it's one guitarist. Although, Randy Rhoads, an amazing player. In the studio, they're overdubbing. So he's playing rhythm and lead parts on all the tracks. Live, he's carrying that weight.
Yeah. And we can't talk about Blizzard of Ozz without talking about Randy Rhoads. Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be what it is without him. Should we talk about it?
Yeah. So Ozzy's down in the dumps. He's kicked out of the Black Sabbath band. Black Sabbath, they're kind of foundering at the end of the 70s. I mean, they were hugely popular through the first half of the 1970s and really had a run of great classic albums, really starting from the first self-titled one. Paranoid is considered really the paragon of early heavy metal music, and then Master of Reality, Volume 4, Sabotage, just a great Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. And then the substances are starting to take their toll, the success, infighting. Ozzy's a mess. They're all on drugs. They're all having personal problems, and egos start to come to the front. And their music's really suffering at the late 70s. And it's a story often told now. They go out on tour with Van Halen and just get blown off the stage night after night by this young, hungry band from Pasadena. Another band that's been labeled heavy metal, but no, not heavy metal.
No. And they just came along with, in that time of the new wave. I mean, it was the British new wave of heavy metal, but there were other, the LA scene, and that was all happening at that time too. So they just kind of got swept up into that label. And, at this point, Black Sabbath, they've been around. They had 7 albums, 7 studio albums and 1 live album by the time they kicked Ozzy out. And it's very clear that Ozzy's lifestyle it's been out of control for a long time, but it's finally catching up to him to the point where they just can't take it anymore. So he's kicked out of the band. He goes even further down into the depths of drugs, alcohol, and he's just a mess. And, this is pre-Sharon. He's not married to Sharon at this point. She's his manager and managing Black Sabbath, right?
Yeah, and rather ruthless manager. She's the daughter of a notorious British manager and music mogul, Don Arden, her maiden name Sharon Arden. And she definitely picked up some tricks from the old man.
And she actually is the one that suggested they bring in Ronnie James Dio to take over Ozzy's place in Black Sabbath.
Pretty good move, as it turns out.
Pretty good move, because they put an album out in 1980. I just listened to it for the first time when we were researching this show. And
me too.
Great album. Great. I've always loved Dio's vocals. Yeah. Like, he's one of the best vocalists, especially of this genre, but of any vocalist. But so good.
The lead track on that, which is a killer
Neon
track.
Nights.
Neon Nights is smokes.
Awesome song.
That is so good. Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, Black Sabbath, they're carrying on doing their own thing and having success. Ozzy, he's down in the dumps. But like I said, we can't talk about Blizzard of Ozz without talking about Randy Rhoads. He was born into a musical family, educated in folk and classical guitar. His mom was a professional piano player. She ran a music school.
Yeah, steeped in music from birth.
Yeah, and graduated early from school so that he could pursue music. Started a band with a friend who he went to high school with, Kelly Garney, and they were in several bands leading up to eventually bringing on singer Kevin Dubrow and drummer Don Forsythe and became Quiet Riot. This is in 1976.
Yep, several years before their big commercial breakthrough. And little foreshadowing, I will be surprised if Quiet Riot doesn't pop up on our playlist in a few years here.
Oh, for sure. I mean, Quiet Riot just became, so huge and was at the tail end kind of the new wave of heavy metal. But at this time, they were really popular in the LA club circuit, and they were signed to Sony in 1976, recorded 2 albums that were only released in Japan. So he could see the writing on the wall that Quiet Riot really was not going to become the band that he had hoped and have success like he wanted. So he auditioned for Ozzy. At this time, I think he hadn't really been playing like heavy guitar rock for that many years. I mean, he had been in several bands before, but he was steeped in folk and classical and like really a trained musician. And there's all these stories about the initial audition, how Ozzy heard like 1 or 2 riffs and said, yeah, he's got the job because he looks the part, or, and here's Randy Rhoads, who's already at this point really has chops up there like Eddie Van Halen.
And an interesting part of the musical childhood, his family didn't have a stereo. They didn't play recorded music at home. So they had to play all the music themselves at home, which is pretty interesting.
They were like playing Stones and Beatles, Santina's brother, because they didn't have a stereo. Like that was their music.
Pretty cool. Yeah. I mean, it's not like he never listened to records. Yeah. He went to friends' houses and stuff. But in the family home, they all played their own music.
Right. So he was really kind of performing in that sense at an early age too. So he joins Ozzy's band, and he goes to London and finds that he doesn't have the proper work permit, which was supposed to be provided to him. So he was turned away. I'm sure this was probably his first sense that I'm dealing with a person
doesn't have it all together. Yeah.
Doesn't have it together.
He ended up incarcerated briefly because of that.
Yes. So he went back, and finally, like maybe a month later, they got everything in place, got him over there. They brought in Uriah Heep's drummer,
Lee Kerslake,
to complete the band. At the time, the band was called the Blizzard of Oz. Now, I have to say, this is a genre of music that I know very little about and have really not spent much time listening to. Not because I don't like it necessarily.
Yeah, we're both coming clean here. We're dilettantes when it comes to metal music.
I had never listened to the Blizzard of Oz album. Of course, I know and love Crazy Train, which is why I chose it for my song. I think it definitely transcends genres and is a crossover hit. I knew of Randy Rhoads' legacy, but I didn't realize just like how incredibly talented he was.
Oh, for sure.
And there's songs on this album that there's a classical song.
Beautiful classical. The track D that runs into Suicide Solution. Beautiful acoustic classical oriented piece.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like Eddie in that he is extremely gifted as a soloist. I mean, he can shred, play very fast, classical oriented solos, but also a hell of a rhythm player.
Which is what comes into play for Crazy Train, because what makes Crazy Train so great is the riff.
The chugging riff.
The chugging riff. And first, of course, you hear the I, Ozzy's out there. He's out there and he's coming. Then you get that kick drum. Don't.
Yeah, the way they build to the riff. Yeah.
That riff that really is like a train. I'm not a guitarist, so I don't really know what this means, but I read that it's recorded in the key of F sharp minor, which sounds like it's not normal. And this is what I read, that most heavy metal songs are in an A to E chord structure. So apparently Randy and Ozzy made a rule that almost every song would never be played in the same key.
Yeah, I don't think Ozzy had anything to do with it. I think it was pretty much all Randy. I don't think Ozzy would know the key of F sharp minor from a cheese sandwich. And I want to break in here and say, so when we are in 1980, in 5th, 6th grade and whatnot, and this music is starting to become popular, I mean, there is this moral panic among adults and parents about it. It's considered to be just scourge and dangerous.
Well, they think it's killing their children, like literally.
Yes. And all these metal guys are devil worshipers, and they're teaching your children to worship Satan. Now, in retrospect, it's so hilarious because when you get to know the personalities of the people, they're all just teddy bears and sweethearts. And like Ronnie James Dio is an extremely articulate man. Ozzy Osbourne is just this goofball character who's just effortlessly hilarious in everything he says. You know, Brian Johnson, the lead singer for AC/DC, renowned as just a super nice guy everybody loves.
Yeah.
All these scary metal people, you know?
Yeah. I think that what also goes hand in hand with this music is live performances. And they're performers.
Right.
This is an act. A lot of these bands like Judas Priest, and, they put on an amazing visual show as well. And, they're like totally so bought into the image. It becomes so much of a spectacle that Spinal Tap became a thing because of Black Sabbath.
Right.
Because of the album that Black Sabbath recorded with Ian Gillan from Deep Purple. And that actually happened where they got stuck in the pods, during the live show. Like, that's where that came from. The other thing about this, too, is I think that a lot of these guys, they don't take themselves that seriously. No. Like in their live performances or in their music, yeah. But they had so much weight put on them from the scared old people,
You also have to remember what the political climate was in 1980. This is the Reagan Revolution. So you've got this conservative movement sweeping the nation. You got the rise of the moral majority and Jerry Falwell.
Yep.
And that's feeding into this panic. And it's not just music. It's violence and sex on television and movies, video games. I mean, all this stuff. Everything's a threat to our children,
Yeah, but it got to the point even where, like, Suicide Solution, the song Suicide Solution, that was actually parents took them to court saying that they thought that it was like a direct effect of these songs and, was harming their children, and songs being played backwards, it just got so out of control and ridiculous.
Judas Priest had to go through the same nonsense, with a court case. Somebody committed suicide. After listening to one of their songs first. Well, again, this is a hallmark of the heavy metal subculture. It is a culture of outcasts. It's, it's lyrically, it's dealing with dark subject matter. It's dealing with alienation and frustration. It's not good time music.
It follows a lot of the same ideals as punk. These guys they're outsiders. They're people that are...
There's not a huge gap there.
They're banding together and with their fan base too, because they've been kind of tossed aside by society.
Yeah. Lyrically, there's a lot of similarity there. The big gulf between punk and metal is the instrumental virtuosity aspect of it. That's why a lot of metal musicians are pretty sniffy about punk, and don't want to have anything to do with it because they're very proud of the fact that they've mastered their instruments, where not that there aren't punk bands who are great players, but that isn't a requirement in that genre of music. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a much larger population of heavy metal musicians that are very accomplished on their instruments. And actually, one of the albums that we were listening to from 1980 was Iron Maiden. Their first album came out in 1980. Bruce Dickinson wasn't the singer yet.
Yeah, Paul Di'Anno.
Yeah, and you really like that album. And I was like,
I do.
His vocals are just too rough and not... And one of the things that I am attracted to about this music are the vocalists. When you get the really strong, like Ronnie James Dio was kind of the apex of that.
Right. And Rob Halford of Judas Priest is in the same class. Yeah.
Yeah.
Incredible vocalist.
But, Ozzy's kind of in this weird place. Crazy Train, the vocals are very melodic. They definitely come from a pop sensibility.
He was a Beatles freak.
I was going to say, Ozzy was a huge Beatles freak.
Yeah.
That's where when he saw the Beatles perform She Loves You, that's when he decided he was going to be a musician. That's really where his love for music comes from. And you can hear it throughout this album. And that was one of the surprising things too, is I found that this album, it's not very heavy. And maybe Mr. Crowley is probably the most. And that's a song that's very well known from this album. So that people kind of equate that too with the whole Prince of Darkness,
Yep. Actually released as a single in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the cover of the album really belies what's in the grooves, because Randy Rhoads is a very talented heavy guitar player, but the production on this album is subpar.
Yes.
So it doesn't really have that sonic wall that you'd want out of it. And it is rather poppy sounding throughout. It doesn't really match the cover. Lyrically too. The lyrics don't really jive with a lot of metal music.
Actually, I think Crazy Train is a really great example of how people put on, an idea of what they think something is, just totally like judging a book by its cover, really.
Right.
They look at the album cover, they think, but the lyrics to this song, maybe it's not too late to learn how to love and forget how to hate. Like this song is not.
Yeah. It's like all you need is love. It's right out of the Beatles, playbook, right out of John Lennon.
Exactly. But it's just so interesting because I think that there's just all this hoopla about, that genre. I think you're right about the album cover really playing a lot into that.
Can you imagine now conservative parents, religious parents, and again, you got to rewind, 45 years later, we now have like high school bands playing heavy metal music.
Exactly. Yes.
So it's been watered down, but back then it was considered very challenging and dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So now all of a sudden your kid has this album and look at that cover with that demonic looking Ozzy Osbourne holding this cross in the air and there's a skull. And now your kid's like scratching out Ozzy on his, remember kids started doing that in middle school.
On your peachy. Yeah.
And this is 1980. Actually, really, this wasn't happening with Ozzy till later because that album came out much later in the United States. The record company wanted nothing to do with him in the U.S. Basically, he only got signed to Jet Records because that was Sharon's dad that ran the label.
Yeah.
That was Don Arden's label.
Mm-hmm.
So, that album, the Blizzard of Oz album, came out in England only or Europe only. Wasn't released in the U.S. until almost 6 months later.
And Diary of a Madman came out not that long after that, too.
Yeah, right. So all of a sudden, all these kids are getting into Ozzy. It was just weird.
Fast forward now, and I think that this is kind of what started to change the perception of Ozzy Osbourne, of course, was when the Osbourne TV show was on MTV.
Right.
And you saw this character that was just like, okay, this is the Prince of Darkness walking around in his bathrobe, yelling, Sharon! Like, it just doesn't fit. And I think the same is kind of with the song Crazy Train. When you really look at the lyrics and you see that, this is not a scary, I want to go kill somebody song at all. Crazy Train has become one of those songs that people love to cover it just to prove that it's actually a good song. Like from high school marching bands to like bluegrass versions to Pat Boone. Pat Boone has a version. It's like a jazzed up big band version. And it kind of became this thing where it was like, this is a good song. It's very melodic. It's very, and when you transform it in that way, it becomes even more apparent.
It is long since passed into becoming a rock and roll standard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, we got to follow up on the comment about Sharon Osbourne, too, because of the aftermath of this album. What happened a few years down the road? So, as you said, it was initially going to be a band album, the Blizzard of Oz. Well, it comes out, all of a sudden, it's Ozzy Osbourne and these other guys. And they downplayed the input that the rhythm section, Bob Daly, Lee Kerslake had into the composition of the material, and Randy Rhoads to a certain extent as well. Rhoads was getting dissatisfied, was talking about leaving the group. Before he did, though, Daly and Kerslake, the bassist and drummer, bailed. And then later on down the road, when they reissued this album on CD, they wiped their parts and they re-recorded them with Ozzy's current rhythm section. By this time, Sharon and Ozzy were a couple.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't start out that way. She was just his manager. But a whole series of his discs came out and remastered versions on CD. And they all had the kind of similar graphics on the cover. But they'd re-recorded the rhythm parts. And the fans are like, what is this? These aren't the albums that I know. It was such a bad idea.
Not cool. No.
Yeah. So there have been a number of questionable management decisions made along the way, fairly ruthless ones by Mrs. Osbourne down the line.
And Randy Rhoads was planning on leaving the band after his contract was up, after the tour for Diary of a Madman. And then, I mean, it's really one of the saddest and most tragic stories in rock and roll.
Yeah.
They were on tour. Their tour bus broke down somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. And
in Florida, yeah.
One of the guys found a plane that, I don't know, maybe it was an airplane or someone's that he knew.
I think it was the place they were getting the bus service, I think. And it was near an airport and there were planes and he somehow wangled his way into taking this Beechcraft aircraft down. He had a pilot's license.
He had a pilot's license that had been revoked because he had actually killed somebody in a helicopter crash years before.
This was stunning to me. Now, obviously, I knew that Randy Rhoads had perished in an act of misadventure in an airplane and they were buzzing the tour bus. my understanding of what had happened is it was just young guys being silly and clowning around. So, wouldn't that be funny if we'll scare the crap out of them and buzz the plane and then oops. But now I read the story and it's like, God, there's so much more to this that's just unsettling.
Mm-hmm.
The guy who was flying the plane was their driver. I think it was the bus driver. And he, again, this is heavy rock and roll 1980, so everybody's using drugs, except Randy Rhoads was not a drug guy.
No.
Barely drank. He's just considered a very serious musician, nice guy.
Yeah.
Just a wee little guy. I always like to talk about how tall people are. It's just
he's 5'7".
Yeah. They have his measurements on Wikipedia, 5'7", 105. Mm-hmm. Just a tiny little guy.
Yeah.
But he's not a party animal, not at all. He didn't partake in that stuff. But, everybody else is coked out and on drugs and drinking and the whole rock and roll thing, including the bus driver, who apparently is just doing as much coke as anybody and had been up all night. And not only that, at some point, the bus driver's ex-wife had joined the traveling party, and there's some tension there. And, he's wigged out. He's been up all night, and he's depressed with the breakup of his marriage and whatnot. So he'd already gone out with a couple of guys. Randy Rhoads apparently had a fear of flying, but
he wanted to take photos from the plane.
He wanted to take photos for his family.
Yeah.
There was one other passenger on the plane who was the older woman who was the makeup artist for the group, and she had a heart condition, so they'd promised that there was going to be no funny business.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want to give the woman a heart attack. So he'd been messing around, buzzing the plane, doing stunt stuff. So they said, no, they're just going to fly around so Randy can take photos. Well, here they go again, buzzing the tour bus. Now, I want to say it was Rudy Sarzo who was with the group. It was somebody in the band, or maybe it was Don Airey, the keyboardist, claims that as the plane is approaching the bus, that he saw there was a struggle going on in the cockpit. Now, there is a theory now that this drugged-out bus driver was in a state of depression. His wife was out there outside the bus. He was going to fly the plane into the bus and kill himself.
Take out the ex-wife.
I had never heard this story before.
I hadn't either, and I read that too, and that Randy Rhoads was like fighting with him to try, and because the plane was like going back and forth and it was like almost perpendicular at one time to the ground.
The wings are going. Yeah.
And then they could see him struggling with the pilot.
The plane ends up clipping the bus, breaking the wing, and losing control, crashing into a house, bursting into flames. Everybody's burnt to a crisp. But there's a theory now that Randy Rhoads actually was struggling with the pilot to keep him from just full on drilling the bus with the plane and saving, the people inside.
Which would have killed them all. Yeah. Including Ozzy.
That was a mind blower to read. I had never heard that story before.
No.
So if true, that's a heroic act, but what a loss. I mean, such a gifted player.
Mm-hmm.
And, the cult around him was well-deserved. Even though I wasn't listening to this music, I certainly remember, and being around other people who were into this music that just revered Randy Rhoads as this guitar god. You could see why. Just incredible talent. Lost. He's 25 years old. Just a shame.
Yeah.
So last note on this, for this episode, we've kind of been focusing on a core group of albums here. I would rate Blizzard of Oz last among that group just because the production just really robs it of the power it could have had.
The production is a shame,
doesn't
really.
Sound good at all.
Because, his vocals are really very deep. It's just muddy. It's really too bad because I think it has a lot of really, really good songs on it. And the reason why the production on this is really not good is because they started out with a producer and then they fired him after the first week of recording, and then the band co-produced the album.
Yeah, mistake.
Yes. I mean, it really shows. I don't know. I've never really heard much about the recording of this. I don't know who normally was their producer. If they had a producer.
Roger Bain, I think, on the early Sabbath albums, and then again, Sabbath. It's a black hole in my musical education. I mean, I've listened to Paranoid and bits and pieces.
I did listen to some Black Sabbath albums, and I was surprised because the Black Sabbath stuff sounds so much better than this album. Yeah. Ozzy's vocals are in the front. You can really hear them. And I was kind of thinking, okay, maybe they're sort of hearkening back to the sound of Black Sabbath and kind of more of that muddy, heavy sound. No, those albums are way more well-produced than this one. But this also tells you, too, how important a good producer really is.
Yeah.
But I also think that the reason Blizzard of Oz didn't have the production, didn't have Because Ozzy was like out of his mind, like Ozzy was running this ship.
You could probably tell Ozzy that Phil Spector produced this album and he'd probably believe you.
Probably.
The 40th anniversary edition is what I listened to. And you can't crank it. I mean, I've probably done myself hearing damage these last 2 days because to really appreciate this kind of music, to really, truly appreciate it, you have to listen to it loud and you have to listen to it on a quality stereo system.
Yeah.
So I tried cranking up Blizzard of Oz, and Ozzy's vocals, it just sears into your brain. It just sounds
it's like
awful.
Piercing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, like you said, it's muddy. The guitar is muffled and muddy. It just does not sound good at all.
It should be produced like a Van Halen album.
Right.
But instead...
Or
our
next record.
Yep.
Now, this is the exact opposite. So I definitely was aware of this band in 1980. This is really the band where I started to see kids getting into hard rock. Now, when I was really little in second grade, I know kids were listening to Kiss, but that's just kind of cartoon, glam rock, not really all that heavy. Now in sixth grade, you mentioned drawing the logo on the Peachy. Saw a lot of people drawing that AC/DC logo on the Peaches in 1980. And they really started breaking through commercially with their previous album in 1979, the Highway to Hell album. And again, there's another example of a band that just got pilloried. They got this album called Highway to Hell. They got this, Angus has got the devil horns on the cover. And then there's the name of the band too, which has connotations. It's, it's a term for bisexuality. I don't think they realize that when they name themselves that. I don't know if that translates in Australia or not. So all of that fed into the controversy.
When you have hell in the title of your album, you pretty much figure you're going to get pigeonholed there.
But they've been touring hard for years at this point. Their first record started coming out in the mid-'70s in Australia, and their first worldwide release in 76 with Let There Be Rock. So they're touring, they're opening for all the big hard rock bands of the day, starting to play stadiums and getting noticed that way. And they're a great live band. You've got this incredibly charismatic frontman, Bon Scott. He wasn't their original lead singer. They went through a whole bunch of personnel changes. So the band is centered around the Young brothers, Angus, the lead guitarist, Malcolm, the rhythm guitarist. Their older brother is George Young, who is a very famous musician in Australia. And he'd been in a band called the Easy Beats, which was a massive band in the 60s in Australia. They had one hit that crossed over worldwide called Friday in My Mind. I don't even know if it made the top 40 in the United States, but it's one of the classic 60s garage rock songs. Great, great song.
Mm-hmm.
But Easy Beats were huge in Australia. And then after they broke up, George Young and one of his bandmates, Harry Vanda, formed a songwriting production partnership. And they kind of took the younger brothers under their wing, helped them along, actually produced their first several albums. In fact, they were the producers, Vanda and Young, until the Highway to Hell album. Now you get a guy whose name is Robert John Lang, known as Mutt Lang. He would go on to be probably the most successful producer in the history of maybe music, period. If you look at record sales, I don't think anybody's ever made more money in the music business as a producer than Mutt Lang when you look at all that he's been involved with. But at this point, he's still a relative unknown. I think his first hit song was actually and just in England with the Boomtown Rats in 78 with Rat Trap. That was a big hit in England. They were very underground in the United States. He's a South African, came from a pretty wealthy family, was a musician himself in bands in South Africa. By now he's in England. But he starts developing this reputation as a producer, got great sounds. And, AC/DC, they're just this good time, back to basics, hard rock band with a strong rhythmic bass. You've got the visual appeal with Angus Young and his schoolboy uniform and his headband.
Yeah.
He was doing that from a very early on. A lot of personnel changes early, but the key change was getting Bon Scott and his lead vocalist. Super charismatic guy. Now, all these guys are emigres. They're all from Scotland originally. Their families are from Scotland. They emigrated to Australia. So they've got that in common. And Bon Scott has this very distinctive voice. He's the lyricist as well, and it's all just super macho stuff, but it's all tongue-in-cheek, too. It's all cheeky humor, sexual innuendo, strutting, but it's all just kind of, with a wink and a nudge. Although not everybody interpreted it that way. Certainly, I think you look back at it now, and it's pretty harmless. Bon Scott, just super charismatic guy. So you got the visual appeal, this cocky little, Scots Australian guy up front, this crazy, tiny little guitarist who's just all over the stage, rolling around. And their guitar sound is fabulous. You've got, as I mentioned, Malcolm Young, the heart of the band, and rhythm guitar. But Angus Young rips off these solos, and their guitar sound, and it would be perfected with Mutt Lange, because he is this studio perfectionist and knew how to get the best out of them. Again, I'm not a guitarist either, so I'm kind of talking out of the side of my mouth. I'm just a music fan. But as far as hard rock guitar goes, you cannot beat the tone of that Gibson SG. Just that fat, meaty, thick, tough sound. And nobody got better guitar sounds, I think, in rock music than Angus Young and Malcolm Young. So Mutt Lange takes them to that next level because he polishes off their rough edges a little bit. The Highway to Hell album is a commercial breakthrough. Now they're a headlining act after they've been opening for all these hard rock bands. But just as they're starting to hit this crescendo, they come off this massive tour for Highway to Hell, very successful. They start to record their new album, and then the hard partying ends Bon Scott's life. He got super drunk one night. His driver had taken him back to his apartment, couldn't get him to budge out of the car, so I'll just leave him here to sleep it off in the back seat. Well, he chokes on his own vomit, dies in the night, and boom. You think, God, this is the end, right? Because, we just had Led Zeppelin lose John Bonham. That was the end of them right around the same time. So just a huge blow to this band that's just now starting to hit it big worldwide and in the United States in particular. What are they going to do? I mean, how could you have AC/DC without Bon Scott?
It's their lead singer.
Right,
yeah.
Right. So they find this guy named Brian Johnson, total unknown, and certainly in the United States. I think regionally probably made a name for himself in England. He's from the north of England, Newcastle. Was in a band called Geordie, which is a term for people from that area. They're called Geordies. Like Ozzy Osbourne's from Birmingham, England. They call them Brummies. If you're from Liverpool, you're a Scouser. So if you're from Newcastle, you're a Geordie, Geordie, like the name George with DIE. So they hear this guy and think, man, he's got some unbelievable pipes. Kind of similar with the raspy vocals as Bon Scott, but way more range and just this piercing vocals that is just cut through steel. I mean, just powerful, which is important because this is such a powerful, loud band. That vocal needs to cut through that mix. And now you have this expert producer, and they take the polish from Highway to Hell, they take it to the next level with this Back in Black album. They recorded it in the Bahamas. And as bad as Blizzard of Oz sound, this album, if you can find another hard rock album that sounds better than Back in Black, I'd like to hear it. It's just so powerful, incredibly powerful, yet pristine and clean. And it's very real sounding. The drum sound he gets, particularly on the title track, Back in Black, that snare is one of the most powerful drum sounds. I mean, it feels like you're inside of that drum. It's incredible. It's just incredible. And, I was never a fan of AC/DC. I grew to appreciate the song we're going to put on our playlist, You Shook Me All Night Long, just because it's a pop song. It's a very catchy tune. Very catchy tune. But again, to really appreciate good rock music, you got to hear it on a good system. I never really got AC/DC fully until I picked up the CD, the original CD, not the remaster now. This is the original CD release. Barry Diamond was the mastering engineer, very well regarded. Put this in my Mazda 3 GT with the upgraded Bose sound system in it. Cranked that sucker up, and it just blew my freaking mind. I mean, I've got plenty of records in my collection that are great audiophile quality recordings. I never heard a hard rock record that sounds as good as this, that you could just crank up to the max and still sounds great. I mean, it's so powerful. The low end is so great on that record. The guitars sound amazing. And then Brian Johnson's voice, which, admittedly is not for everybody. It is very distinct. Again, vocals of distinction, very important in quality music. It cuts through that mix. It's just an expertly recorded, mixed, mastered record, and it sounds bloody amazing on a good sound system. So powerful.
Yeah, the sound of this album shoots it into the stratosphere, beyond anything that just the songs alone could have done.
Now, am I going to sit here and tell you You Shook Me All Night Long is my favorite track on the album? I don't think it is. I might go with Shoot to Thrill, which is a killer groove, just killer driving groove behind it. I might go with the last track, Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution, which is this dirty, slow, just killer track.
I would probably go with Back in Black.
You texted me this today, and I was thinking the same thing. As great as this record is, the sequencing is baffling. How do you not lead off the record with Back in Black and then You Shook Me On? How are those the first two tracks on side 2? Who decided that was a good idea?
This album should have started with Back in Black. And actually, that's one of the things that I found when I was listening to a lot of these heavy metal albums from this year and around this year. So many of them, the opening track is like amazing. Like they know exactly how to start an album, and it just like grabs you by the throat and it's like, and that's what this should have had. Back in Black should have been the first song on this album.
Now it starts with Hell's Bells, which is it's a great track. It's a classic, deservedly. But as the opener when you got Back in Black and it's the album title and this is and the whole idea is this is the memoriam to Bon Scott, so it's funereal. They wanted an all black album. They had to concede the record company at least had their name outlined. But Back in Black and then You Shook Me All Night Long would be the perfect way to open the album.
Perfect 1-2 punch.
Yeah, not that it isn't a great album the way it is, but you got to go with You Shook Me All Night Long because that's the song everybody knows. Even people who aren't really into AC/DC or into hard rock, you have to give them props. It's a very catchy, hooky pop song, but still powerful hard rock. And the lyrics are funny. They're clever. Brian Johnson is not the lyricist that Bon Scott is. Bon Scott had this great humor in his lyrics. Brian Johnson's are a little more cringy, but the lyrics on You Shook Me All Night Long are great. Knocking me out with those American thighs. I mean, it's just so funny.
Well, this is also one of those songs that transcends genres, generations. I remember this was the song that we would play on the bus on the way to our softball games. And even our coach would be singing along with it. They're singing, she was a fast machine. She kept her motor clean. She was the best damn woman that I ever seen.
It's fun. It's fun.
But you have to have something that is truly catchy to go along with those lyrics to get people to sing that in a setting like that,
Yeah. When it came out, you couldn't imagine that any school-related function would have AC/DC or Ozzy Osbourne music playing like in the PA or on the bus or anything like that. That would have been unimaginable at the time. But now
I mean, look at Back in Black. That's pretty dark. It's so interesting now to kind of look back on it versus when it first came out and just the backlash and how things were just became so much bigger than they really were, because when it comes right down to it, these are pop songs, really.
Both of them are, They
do have a hard rock sound to them, but that's what makes them songs that have lasted as long as they have too. They've crossed over because they're pop songs.
So we're going with Crazy Train and You Shook Me All Night Long. You Shook Me All Night Long, not a metal song. Crazy Train, it's debatable, I think. You can make a claim that it's metal, but it is very poppy.
I think if it were produced different, it could have been heavier and more metal.
Yeah. But the other records that we listened to and we focused on for this, the first Iron Maiden album, and again, they would hit their commercial popularity when Bruce Dickinson joins the band a couple albums down the line. So this is a different proposition early on. I really dig this record because I like the grittier, rougher part of rock music. And this record, to me, really seems to be drawing heavily from the early 70s harder rock stuff that I'm really into. The stuff like Deep Purple, Blue Oyster Cult, this Led Zeppelin. I love that.
I appreciate it for that. Yeah. I don't like the vocals as much because they are rougher. And because I really like Bruce Dickinson's vocals. But I went back and listened to Samson, which was the band that Bruce Dickinson was in at this time. Those guys were just not there. They didn't have the technical ability. They didn't have the musicianship. So it was actually a really great combination once he did meet up with Iron Maiden. Then they became great.
I found this pretty noteworthy. That first Maiden album, Running Free, was actually a big enough seller as a single to get them on Top of the Pops, the big chart show that everybody in England watches. And that show's renowned because bands come on, they mime to their songs. They don't do them live. Nobody had done a live set on Top of the Pops since 1972. The Who was the last band to perform live until Iron Maiden went out. They insisted. Because heavy metal, it's almost like country music in this respect. You got to have a good stage show or you're not going to make it. They've been banging around for a long time turned over a lot of different personnel. The heart of the band, really the bassist, Steve Harris, kind of running that show. And his bass sound is really a key part of they call it the galloping bass. Steve Harris, very apt description. But they went on, they did it live. But you look at Paul Di'Anno, he looks more like a punk rock. He looks like Darby Crash leading a metal band. And this guy was a mess. This guy was a mess. Yeah. It's a wonder he's still alive. Just a complete wreck in his personal life with arrests and drug and alcohol addiction and violence. And he looks like a total thug. But his, it's suited. There was a bit of a punk feel to those early albums by Iron Maiden. A little gritty, a little rough, although they could definitely play, no doubt about that. But he was kind of responsible for that.
I think what kind of goes along in that line too, another album that came out this year is Motorhead Ace of Spades. And of course I know the song and it's a great song, but I listened to that album. I was like, okay, that's one where, Lemmy's vocals are definitely more in that punk vein and they're rough and
a lot of punk fans were big fans of them too. Yeah. They definitely had a foot in both camps.
Yeah. But I liked that album. I liked that album more than the Iron Maiden, I think, because I just equate Iron Maiden more with Bruce Dickinson's vocals. I tend to go more toward the cleaner, really strong, and almost sometimes even like operatic sounding vocals that some of these guys can do.
So we have to tip our cap to the band that probably, I think, best exemplifies what metal music is at its core, and that's Judas Priest, and their key album comes out in 1980, British Steel.
Oh, yeah. And that's really the beginning of this new wave of British heavy metal, too. They are kind of what started that. But they had already had a few really great albums out before this one. Actually, this is where it occurred to me about the blues, because they do a cover of Green Manalishi on the album before this one. And that's a Fleetwood Mac song from their first album.
Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. One of the last things that he recorded with the band. Super heavy song, lyrically and musically.
Yes. But it still has a blues background to it. And that's what you don't get on the Judas Priest version. And I was like, that was where it kind of occurred to me. Okay, pull that out. You still have the heavy music, which is in the original. It is a very heavy track, but there's something there. It's the blues aspect, I think, that is what is taken away.
It's funny. Just before we started recording, I told you I'm a little nervous about this episode because this isn't really my genre.
Yeah,
and I'm not
either.
And I know metal fans are very dedicated, very knowledgeable, very passionate. Don't want to do them a disservice here. But I was very excited about doing this episode too because, it forced me to go and listen to these records that I'd never given the time of day before. So Judas Priest, the two songs everybody knows from British Steel are Breaking the Law and Living After Midnight.
Yeah.
I've never really cared for those that much. I think they're kind of slightly corny. But you mentioned all these albums having the great lead track, Rapid Fire.
Yeah.
Yes. Now we're talking. Again, this is not a great album through and through.
No.
But the best songs on it kill. And that is what a walloper to start. That, Grinder, and Steeler, those are all three smoking, unquestionably metal tracks.
Yep. No, I agree. And really, when you think of Judas Priest too, you really think of metal.
Yes,
the metal spikes on the leather and the look.
But here again, you've got this dangerous looking group, the name, Judas Priest, the iconography on the covers, the lyrics, the fetish gear, the metal and studs and leather. And then years later, you come to find Rob Halford's a gay man. He's just this nice guy, just genuinely nice guy, articulate. Again, it's performance art. They're performers.
Right.
It's all in fun. And almost none of the metal fans at the time would have had an inkling about the connotations of that stage wear.
No.
In retrospect, we look back at guys like Rob Halford and Freddie Mercury and like, well, of course they're gay, right? How did not everybody know that? This was still pretty underground stuff back. This mainstream America was just not clued in to these things.
No.
I think there's this feeling that metal is just this super masculine genre of music, and nobody would ever accept, somebody coming out as gay. Well, he's as loved as he ever was. Metal fans are very, very accepting.
Yeah.
It's all about the music and having a good time.
The fact that these guys made it as far as they did, now they're older, their fan base has grown up with them too, and they've moved into a different place in entertainment. Like Judas Priest came out, and I think it was on the Grammys, and he brought the motorcycle out, and and it's like they look just like they did in 1980. And so much of that is the look, the stage show, like everything around it. And that's one of the things that I think that I kind of forgot. And now I'm appreciating more too, along with the music, is that the stage show, the whole package is just so big and grand. Yeah. And I think it's really cool. And I think that it says a lot about these guys, like how much they thought out what they were doing.
It's so sad now. They're getting to this age. Malcolm is gone, early onset dementia. Glenn Tipton, I think, is dealing with something similar, a Parkinson's disease. He's no longer able to play.
Malcolm or Angus?
Malcolm Young.
You'd think Angus would with all the headbanging.
I know. Isn't that nuts? You'd thought, God, how does that guy not have permanent brain damage?
I mean, it's just nonstop.
Yeah, I know. So Glenn Tipton is falling prey. Ronnie James Dio is now more than a decade gone from cancer. And we should tip our hat to, Black Sabbath was just about cooked. When Ozzy got kicked out of the band, they bring in Dio, and they're completely rejuvenated with the great Heaven and Hell album, 1980.
Incredible album. Yeah.
Rock, yeah.
And another album that sounds great.
Yes.
And when you play those two back to back between Blizzard of Oz and Heaven and Hell, it is even more of a shame.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's what
Blizzard
I did.
of Oz sounds.
That's what I did this morning. I listened to Blizzard of Oz, then I listened to Heaven and Hell, and it's pretty. I listened to Blizzard of Oz in the middle of Back in Black and Heaven and Hell, which is it sounds awful compared to those. But yeah, all these guys are kind of passing on with us now. But
Ozzy's still around.
Barely. But he's not well either. Yeah, he's not well either. But yeah, 1980 is really when it starts to take off for this music. And it had kind of dissipated for a few years with the emergence of disco and then punk rock in the UK. Hard rock, heavy metal music was falling out of favor. But then, boom, new wave of British heavy metal. Judas Priest comes out with their signature album. Black Sabbath rejuvenated with the addition of Ronnie James Dio, who'd been the vocalist in Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow before that. He was actually in a band called Elf that opened for Deep Purple for several years. And then, of course, Back in Black, massive. Mutt Lange's a very rich man. He'd be a very rich man just on Back in Black. That has sold now over 50 million copies. It is the second biggest selling album of all time. Back in 1980, could you have imagined such a thing? That's incredible. Now, Mutt Lange would go on to be known for just these super heavily produced and processed albums down the line, particularly the Def Leppard albums that he produced. Pyromania and Hysteria. I mean, there's hardly a real note on those albums. They're so heavily sampled and produced. But this AC/DC album, you are right there in the room. It just sounds so real. Those drums sound so clean and so amazing. I don't think any of the drum sounds on Pyromania were real at all. Maybe the cymbals.
Yeah, it's all really processed.
Mutt Lange produced Pyromania and Hysteria, massive albums for Def Leppard worldwide, the Heartbeat City album for the Cars, and then Shania Twain's two albums, which he co-wrote, which were massive sellers as well. Interesting cat. He's very reclusive. He never has done interviews. I think most people know Mutt Lange because of all the drama with Shania Twain and the breakup of their marriage more than anything else, which is sad. But I mean, if he did nothing else other than Back in Black, one of the greatest produced rock albums of all time, maybe the best. I mean, just, tip of the cap to old Mutt. But anyway, as promised, we have rocked up our playlist with the addition of Ozzy Osbourne's Crazy Train and AC/DC's You Shook Me All Night Long. And you metal fans, Cheryl and I getting turned on to a lot of classics, and I'm sure we'll be listening to more as a result of getting ready for this episode. Eye-opening experience. I'm glad for the experience.
Yeah, me too. This is one of the things I really enjoy so much about doing this podcast is it's opened my eyes to a lot of music that I just hadn't really explored.
Yeah. Well, we thank you for tuning in for another episode of Matt and Cheryl's Gen Excellent Playlist. I'm Matt.
I'm Cheryl.
And take care, everybody.